9 days after her dream wedding, a loving Filipina bride walked into a hotel room and turned her fairy tale into a nightmare, leaving behind 2 bodies, a shattered vow, and a nation asking how love could twist into murder so quickly. The sun poured over the turquoise waters of Boracay, turning the beach into a dazzling reflection of gold and white. Guests from different parts of the world gathered, dressed in light summer colors, waiting for the ceremony to begin. At the center of it all stood Lina Dela Cruz, a 28-year-old nurse from Cebu, her heart pounding beneath the lace of her gown. She had spent months planning every detail of this day, never believing that a girl from a modest family could marry a man like Ryan Taylor. He was everything she had dreamed of: tall, confident, successful, and kind. Their love story began on a dating app, where long conversations soon turned into late-night video calls, then visits to the Philippines. To Lina, Ryan was not just her fiancé. He was proof that true love still existed. As she walked down the sandy aisle lined with white orchids, Ryan smiled at her from the altar, his blue eyes gleaming in the sunlight. Cameras flashed, laughter filled the air, and music swelled from the small band nearby. The officiant spoke about destiny and devotion, while the waves crashed softly in the background, sealing their vows with the rhythm of the sea. When they exchanged rings, Lina whispered a silent promise to make their marriage last forever. That evening, the celebration continued under string lights and a full moon. Toasts were made, dances were shared, and the couple's first kiss as husband and wife drew cheers from the crowd. Friends spoke of how perfect they looked together, how blessed they were to have found each other. But as Ryan slipped away briefly to take a phone call, no one noticed Lina's faint frown. In that single moment, beneath the glow of happiness, a shadow quietly began to form. After the wedding, Lina and Ryan flew to Manila for their honeymoon, leaving the island behind like a fading dream. Ryan had arranged everything in advance: a luxury penthouse on the top floor of a glass tower overlooking the city skyline. When they arrived, Lina couldn't help but marvel at the view. The glittering lights below made her feel like she was standing at the center of the world. Ryan poured champagne, toasting to their future, and for a while, everything seemed perfect. They laughed, watched movies, and ordered expensive meals from room service. Lina believed she had finally stepped into the life she had always imagined. Days passed quickly in a blur of romance and indulgence. Ryan showered her with gifts, designer clothes, gold jewelry, and a brand new phone. He talked about buying a house, maybe even starting a family soon. Lina listened with adoration, her heart full of hope. But slowly, little things began to change. Ryan became less talkative, often distracted by his phone. He spent hours on his laptop, claiming to be handling business deals. Late at night, he'd step onto the balcony to make important calls, whispering in a tone she could barely hear. Lina tried not to worry. She convinced herself that he was just adjusting to married life or stressed about work. Still, something felt off. The man who once couldn't stop looking at her now seemed distant, his eyes tired and restless. He started canceling dinner plans, leaving early in the mornings without saying where he was going. When she asked, he smiled and brushed it off, promising to make it up to her later. What Lina didn't know was that Ryan's phone wasn't filled with business messages at all. It held the beginning of a betrayal that would soon destroy them both. On the 9th morning of their marriage, Lina woke early to prepare breakfast, humming softly as she cooked his favorite omelet. Ryan's phone was lying on the counter, vibrating with notifications. She had never been the type to snoop, but a flash of curiosity made her glance at the screen. In that moment, one message appeared and disappeared just as quickly. Asterisk, last night was perfect. Can't wait to see you again. Asterisk, her hand froze midair, the spatula trembling between her fingers. For several seconds, she stood motionless, her mind refusing to accept what she had just read. Her chest tightened, the sound of her own heartbeat louder than the sizzling pan. She reached for the phone again, scrolling through his messages, but the thread was gone, deleted. Her stomach twisted with nausea as realization set in. Every romantic gesture of the past few days suddenly felt like a lie. The way he avoided eye contact, the late-night calls, the sudden trips out. Everything fit into place like cruel puzzle pieces. She wanted to scream, but her voice failed her. Lina forced herself to breathe, pretending nothing had happened when Ryan entered the room minutes later. He kissed her forehead, asked for coffee, and chatted casually about going out to meet a client. She nodded, keeping her tone calm, but inside her thoughts raced in every direction. She knew confronting him without proof would only lead to denial. So she smiled and said goodbye as he left, then sat down at the table, staring blankly at the untouched food. In that silence, something inside her shifted. The woman who once believed in fairy tale love was gone. What remained was a storm of betrayal, confusion, and a quiet determination to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. That evening, Lina waited until Ryan dressed and announced he had a late meeting with a client. He kissed her on the cheek before leaving, his usual charm masking any trace of guilt. She watched him walk out the door, her expression calm, but her pulse racing. A few minutes later, she grabbed her small purse, wrapped a shawl over her shoulders, and followed him quietly into the night. The Manila streets were crowded, filled with honking cars and neon lights, but she stayed several meters behind, keeping him in sight. Her heart pounded as he hailed a taxi, and she quickly got into another, instructing the driver to follow. The drive seemed endless, each turn deepening her suspicion. When Ryan finally stepped out near a boutique hotel on the city's outskirts, Lina felt a chill run down her spine. She watched him enter through a side door, adjusting his shirt as he disappeared inside. 10 minutes later, another taxi stopped near the entrance. A woman stepped out, a familiar face that made Lina's stomach drop. It was Jessica, one of the wedding guests who had congratulated her with a warm hug and a smile just days earlier. Lina's hands trembled as she pulled out her phone. From the shadows of a parked car, she took photos, each flashless click capturing undeniable evidence of betrayal. Her breath grew heavy, fogging the car window as she watched the two walk together into the same room. Minutes passed like hours before she finally turned away. That night, she returned home alone, her eyes burning with silent tears. She deleted nothing from her phone, replaying the images over and over. The shock had turned into something darker, a deep, simmering rage that whispered for justice, or perhaps for revenge. The following morning, Lina sat in silence, staring at the photos she had taken the night before. The faces of Ryan and Jessica smiling together felt like knives twisting in her chest. The man she had married just 9 days earlier had already destroyed the vows they made under the sun. Her hands shook as she scrolled through the images, disbelief giving way to cold resolve. She didn't cry anymore. She simply felt empty. The woman who once dreamed of a quiet life filled with love and family was gone. In her place stood someone hardened by betrayal. Lina spent the day in a daze, barely moving, barely eating. She began searching online for how to report infidelity and ways to catch cheaters, but the words blurred on the screen. Every search led her deeper into anger. She thought about confronting Ryan, imagined shouting at him, demanding answers. But then she saw his smiling face in the wedding photos on the wall and felt only hatred. Slowly, a plan began forming in her mind. It didn't start as murder. It began as punishment, something that would make him feel the pain he had caused. That afternoon, she reached out to a coworker's cousin rumored to deal in unregistered weapons. She told herself it was just for protection, just in case Ryan turned violent when she confronted him. But deep down, she knew the truth. By the time evening came, she had bought a small pistol and hidden it inside her dresser drawer. She wrote a short letter to her parents, apologizing without explanation. As darkness fell, Lina stood before the mirror, staring at her reflection. Her wedding ring gleamed faintly in the light, and for the first time, she saw not a bride, but a stranger preparing for something irreversible. The night was unusually quiet when Lina left her apartment, dressed in black from head to toe. She moved like a shadow, her footsteps soundless against the empty street. The small pistol rested cold against her skin, hidden beneath her jacket. Every step she took brought her closer to the hotel where she had seen them before. Her heart beat fast, but her mind was clear. The air was heavy, the sky moonless, and the city lights glowed faintly in the distance. She reached the building and stood across the street, watching as cars came and went. Each passing minute felt like an eternity. At 10:47 p.m., Ryan's car pulled up to the curb. He stepped out with his usual confidence, adjusting his shirt as if he had nothing to hide. Lina's breath caught when she saw Jessica appear moments later, her red dress gleaming under the dim streetlight. They entered the same room together, laughing softly, unaware of the eyes following them. Lina waited for a few minutes before crossing the street and slipping into the hotel. Her hands trembled, but her expression was cold. The hallway was narrow, the air thick with perfume and anticipation. She stopped at their door and listened. Through the thin walls, she could hear muffled voices, laughter, and the clink of glasses. Her pulse thundered in her ears. The door wasn't locked properly. It clicked open with the slightest push. Time seemed to slow. Both turned toward her, faces frozen in shock. Without hesitation, she lifted the gun. Two deafening shots shattered the silence, echoing through the hallway. The laughter stopped. The glasses fell. In a single instant, everything that had once defined her life, love, trust, dreams, disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the sound of her own ragged breathing. Lina stood motionless, her hands still gripping the gun as the smell of gunpowder filled the room. The world around her seemed unreal, as if she were trapped in someone else's nightmare. Ryan lay motionless on the bed, his eyes wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. Jessica's body was slumped beside him, her red dress stained dark with blood. The once romantic setting, soft lights, wine glasses, and scattered rose petals, had turned into a scene of horror. For a moment, Lina felt nothing. No satisfaction, no relief, only a strange emptiness that hollowed her from within. Then, as the shock began to fade, panic took its place. Her breathing quickened. The reality of what she had done crashed over her like a wave. She dropped the gun, the metal clattering loudly on the tile floor. Her knees buckled, but she forced herself to move. She grabbed her purse, stumbled toward the door, and fled down the stairwell, her footsteps echoing through the narrow corridor. Outside, the cool night air hit her face, but it did nothing to calm her shaking body. She ran aimlessly through the dark streets until her legs could no longer carry her. Hours later, a hotel cleaner discovered the bodies. Within minutes, police swarmed the scene, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. They found everything they needed to identify the killer: Lina's fingerprints on the gun, her purse left behind in her rush, and clear CCTV footage showing her arrival and departure. The story broke across television networks before dawn. Newlywed bride murders husband and mistress, the headline screamed. By morning, the entire country knew her name. Somewhere out in the city, Lina sat alone in a deserted park, staring at her blood-stained hands, realizing there was no turning back. By sunrise, Lina's face was on every television screen in the country. News anchors repeated her name, flashing her wedding photos beside images of the crime scene. Strangers debated her story online. Some called her a monster, others a victim of heartbreak. The police launched a massive manhunt, tracking every lead from Manila to nearby provinces. Checkpoints were set up, and her passport was flagged. But Lina had thought ahead. In the chaos of that night, she had withdrawn all her savings, cut her hair short, and changed into plain clothes before disappearing into the maze of the city. She hid in cheap boarding houses, moving every few days to avoid suspicion. She sold her jewelry for cash and used fake names to rent rooms. Sometimes, she disguised herself as a street vendor, blending into the crowds where no one would look twice. Despite the constant fear of capture, she felt a strange calm. The images of Ryan and Jessica haunted her dreams, yet part of her believed they had deserved what happened. Still, guilt crept in like a shadow, whispering that nothing could undo the horror she had created. Weeks passed, and the search grew more desperate. Investigators interviewed family members, traced her old contacts, and circulated her picture at bus terminals and markets. But Lina was always one step ahead, surviving on cheap meals and the kindness of strangers who didn't recognize her. She spent her nights staring out of windows, replaying the moment she pulled the trigger. It was no longer rage that consumed her, but sorrow, a deep, unbearable ache that followed her everywhere. She knew the police would find her eventually. She just didn't know when or how. Until then, she lived like a ghost, hiding from a world that already condemned her. Lina's month of hiding ended in the small coastal town of Cavite, where she rented a tiny room above a bakery. The owner, an older woman, believed her story of being a widowed nurse looking for work. Lina spent her days helping around the shop, sweeping floors, and serving coffee to customers who had no idea who she really was. Each night, she sat by the window, staring at the sea and clutching a faded wedding photo she couldn't bring herself to throw away. The days blurred together until one morning, the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway broke her fragile calm. Police officers surrounded the building within minutes. A tip from a local resident had revealed her location. She didn't run this time. When they entered her room, Lina was sitting quietly by the window, dressed in simple clothes, her expression blank. The wedding photo lay on her lap, her fingers tracing Ryan's smiling face. As the officers cuffed her hands, she didn't resist or speak. There were no tears, only silence. The bakery owner stood outside, covering her mouth in shock as the woman she thought was harmless was led away. At the police station, Lina confessed everything. She described how she discovered the affair, followed them, and pulled the trigger. Her voice remained calm throughout, as if she were describing someone else's life. When asked if she regretted it, she simply said, "He killed me first." The line never reached the media, sealed in official reports. Her capture became national news, and the country watched in fascination. Some saw her as a cold-blooded murderer, while others pitted her as a heartbroken wife pushed past her limits. Either way, her fate was sealed, and there was no escape from what she had done. The courtroom was packed on the day Lina's trial began. Reporters filled the benches, cameras flashed, and the story that had captivated the nation reached its climax. Lina sat quietly beside her lawyer, dressed in a plain beige uniform, her hair tied back neatly. She looked smaller than before, almost fragile, as the prosecution painted her as a jealous and violent woman who couldn't handle betrayal. They showed photos of the crime scene, played recordings of witnesses, and detailed every step of her plan. Each image was a reminder of the love that had turned into tragedy. Her defense argued that she had acted under extreme emotional distress, a woman shattered by the humiliation of discovering her husband's affair just days after their wedding. They said she lost control, that she didn't intend to kill, only to confront. The testimonies were emotional, but the evidence was undeniable. The gun, the CCTV footage, and her own confession left little room for doubt. As the trial went on, Lina stopped reacting altogether. She no longer cried, no longer looked at the jury. Her gaze stayed fixed on the courtroom floor, as if she had already accepted her fate. When the verdict was read, the air grew heavy. Guilty. Life imprisonment without parole. Lina stood silently as the judge announced her sentence. There was no outburst, no plea, no tears. Only the faint sound of chains as officers led her away. Outside the courthouse, the crowd argued whether justice had been served or not. In prison, she became a quiet presence, often sitting alone, staring at nothing. Other inmates called her the 9-day bride, a woman whose love story had ended in blood. Her name faded from headlines, but her story lingered, an eternal reminder of how love can turn to darkness in the blink of an eye.